At 2:28 in the morning, a device inside Nancy Guthrie's body went silent. Not her phone. Not her camera. Not her alarm system. Something inside her. Something that had been faithfully recording the rhythm of her heart for years, and that, in the darkest hour of February 1st, 2026, simply stopped transmitting. Gone. As if someone had carried her beyond the reach of everything that was supposed to keep her safe. That detail is confirmed. It is documented. It is real. And it is the detail that millions of people cannot get out of their heads, because once you truly understand what it means, you cannot unknow it. You cannot unfeel it. You cannot close the tab and go back to your day as if you never encountered it. This is everything that is known about what happened to Nancy Guthrie. And more importantly, this is everything the public cannot stop asking about what has not been answered. 75 days in. No arrest. No suspect named. No Nancy. Because by the end, that pacemaker timestamp is going to mean something very different to you than it does right now. To understand why millions of people are still awake at midnight scrolling through updates on this case, start at the beginning. Not the beginning the headlines gave, the beginning that the confirmed, documented record provides. Because the facts alone, before any theory or speculation touches them, are already the kind of thing that stays with a person. Nancy Ellen Guthrie lived in the Tucson, Arizona area for more than 50 years, arriving in the early 1970s and putting down roots so deep that the community became inseparable from her identity. She raised 3 children there. She built a life there. She knew her neighbors, attended her church, kept her routines with the quiet discipline of someone who finds genuine comfort in the predictability of ordinary days. She had difficulty walking. She needed daily medication for a heart condition. She had a pacemaker, a small device embedded in her chest, designed to keep her heart beating with the regularity her body could no longer guarantee on its own. The FBI, in their official missing person profile, described her as a vulnerable adult. Not as a dramatic designation. As a clinical fact. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner with family. It was an ordinary evening by every account, the kind of dinner that families have hundreds of times without marking it as significant, without understanding that it might be the last one. When the meal ended, family members drove her home to her residence in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood north of Tucson. They watched her go inside. The garage door closed behind her. That was the last confirmed visual of Nancy Guthrie as a free woman. The next morning, a Sunday, Nancy did not log on to her regular virtual church service. Her friends noticed immediately, this was not a woman who missed church without explanation. When calls went unanswered, concern escalated quickly to alarm. Family was contacted. A 911 call was placed at 12:03 p.m. Pima County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the residence 12 minutes later. What they found was not a missing person situation. What they found was a crime scene. Blood was discovered on the front porch of the residence. It was later confirmed through DNA testing to belong to Nancy Guthrie. The doorbell camera had been tampered with, physically interfered with by someone who did not want to be recorded entering that property. Evidence throughout the home indicated, in the unambiguous words of Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, that Nancy Guthrie had not left her home on her own accord. A crime had been committed. An abduction had taken place. Sheriff Nanos stood before cameras and said it plainly, she was taken. The FBI was brought in immediately alongside Pima County investigators. U.S. Customs and Border Protection joined the effort. Search and rescue teams were deployed. What began as a local missing persons report became, within hours, a multi-agency federal investigation that would eventually draw international attention and park the eyes of millions of strangers on a neighborhood in the Catalina Foothills of Arizona. The FBI released surveillance footage from a Nest camera positioned at Nancy's front door. What that footage showed stopped people cold. A masked figure. Wearing a black jacket, gloves, and a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking backpack. Moving through the frame with a deliberateness that the public immediately recognized as something other than the nervous, chaotic movement of an impulsive criminal. The FBI identified the individual as male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build. That person has not been publicly identified. That person has not been arrested. That person is still, as of the recording of this video, free. And now, remember that pacemaker timestamp. Because here is what the confirmed record shows about what was happening inside that house while that masked figure was at the door. Nancy's pacemaker was connected to a monitoring app on her phone. That app tracked the device's signal in real time. Investigators have confirmed, across multiple credible outlets including a detailed timeline published by KOMO News, that the pacemaker disconnected from that monitoring app at approximately 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. The device went silent. The public read that detail and felt something shift. Not just emotionally, physically. Because what it means is that somewhere in the hours between the garage door closing on January 31st and the sun coming up on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie was moved. Taken beyond the range of her own phone. Beyond the reach of the device that had been keeping silent watch over her heart. At 2:28 in the morning, in the Catalina foothills, while the rest of the neighborhood slept. That is where this story begins. And that is why, 75 days later, it has not ended. 3 days after Nancy was reported missing, the ransom notes began arriving. TMZ received one. Local Arizona stations KOLD and KGUN received them. The notes demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin in exchange for Nancy Guthrie's safe return. 2 deadlines were set, February 5th and February 9th. Both passed. The Bitcoin wallet listed in the notes sat empty throughout. No payment was confirmed. No proof of life was provided. Savannah Guthrie, NBC Today anchor, one of the most recognized faces in American broadcast journalism and Nancy's daughter, appeared in an emotional Instagram video alongside her siblings Annie and Cameron. She looked directly into the camera and said they would pay. That they were ready to listen. That they needed to hear their mother's voice before anything else could happen. They never heard it. The public watched that video and felt the specific helplessness of watching someone with every resource available to them, platform, money, connection, visibility, still be unable to do the one thing they needed to do. There is no amount of fame that buys proof of life from someone who does not want to provide it. There is no broadcast reach that closes the distance between a daughter and a missing mother. Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera that she has stood in front of thousands of times, and she looked, for the first time in her professional life, like someone for whom the camera offered absolutely nothing. The internet watched that and broke a little. Then, on February 11th, something happened that sent true crime communities into overdrive. A small Bitcoin transaction, approximately $152, was sent to the digital wallet listed in one of the ransom notes. This was confirmed by Arizona's Family, Fortune magazine, and multiple credible outlets. The transaction was real. It happened. What it meant, officially, was left unexplained. Authorities declined to say who sent it. Declined to say whether it was connected to the investigation. Declined to say anything beyond acknowledging that activity had occurred in the wallet. The internet did not accept that silence as an answer. Within hours, blockchain forensics experts, credentialed, professional, publicly quoted, were explaining that a small transaction sent to a cryptocurrency wallet can be used to trace the subsequent movement of any funds through the blockchain. That this technique is legitimate. That it is documented. That the blockchain, unlike almost any other form of evidence in existence, is permanent and publicly readable and mathematically impossible to alter retroactively. The CEO of a blockchain forensics firm, quoted in the New York Post, said publicly that activity in a ransom wallet can provide potential investigative clues. The FBI said nothing. Law enforcement said nothing. And the nothing, to hundreds of thousands of people who had been following every development in this case, felt like the specific silence of people who already know something and are not ready to say it yet. That $152 sits in this case like a splinter. Confirmed, documented, and officially unexplained. The human brain does not tolerate unexplained things patiently. It worries at them, returns to them, turns them over in the dark at 2 a.m. wondering what they mean. Millions of people are still turning that $152 over. Here is where the story moves from what is confirmed to what is felt. And in a case like this, a case that has gripped a nation for 2.5 months, what is felt is itself a story worth telling. Because the collective emotional response of millions of ordinary people to an unresolved crime is not noise. It is signal. It is the sound of human beings applying the same instincts and logic they use to navigate every other relationship and situation in their lives, and arriving independently at the same set of questions. The questions that follow are not accusations. Every person named in this video has been officially cleared by law enforcement as a suspect. That is the documented record, and it stands. What follows is a documentation of public sentiment, of the questions that communities across Reddit, TikTok, YouTube, X, and Facebook have been asking collectively, persistently, and with a conviction that has not dimmed in 75 days. Because those questions, the asking of them, the refusal to stop asking them, are themselves part of this story now. The masked figure at Nancy's door moved in a way that the public has not been able to stop analyzing since the footage was released. Watch it once and something registers. Watch it twice and the something has a name. The figure does not hesitate. does not pause at the threshold to orient themselves, does not show the micro-hesitations, the slight slowing, the scanning glance, the momentary recalibration that studies of human movement consistently show when a person is navigating an unfamiliar space under pressure. Instead, the movement is fluid, continuous, the movement of someone who knows exactly where they are and exactly what comes next. Thousands of people in comment sections, people who work in security, in law enforcement, in military operations, in behavioral analysis, have said versions of the same thing independently of each other. That level of operational calm in a high-stress environment is not common. It is trained or it is earned through familiarity. And familiarity with a private residence in a gated neighborhood at 2 in the morning is not something that arrives accidentally. Nobody knows who that figure is. The FBI has not named them. The investigation has not produced a public arrest. But the public keeps asking, out loud in their millions in comment sections that run to thousands of entries, who knew that house well enough to move through it like that? Who had been there enough times that the layout was muscle memory? Who knew which camera to approach and how to interfere with it and where to go after? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the questions of people who understand instinctively that the answer matters more than almost anything else in this case. Because the answer tells you who is responsible. And the answer, whatever it turns out to be, is going to be someone Nancy Guthrie trusted. Someone she let into her home. Someone who crossed that threshold as a guest before crossing it as something else entirely. The public cannot stop sitting with that. Cannot stop feeling the specific horror of it. The betrayal embedded in that footage, whoever ultimately proves responsible, is the kind that cuts deepest, because it could only have been committed by someone who was given access by love. There is a particular way that grief moves through a public figure when someone they love goes missing. It is loud. It is relentless. It reaches for every available platform and refuses to be quieted because quieting feels like surrender and surrender feels like letting go, and letting go is not an option when the person you love might still be out there. Savannah Guthrie moved through this case exactly that way. She stepped away from the Today Show, a position she has held for over a decade, one of the most visible seats in American morning television, to participate in the search for her mother. She released videos. She made public appeals. She wore yellow on the day she returned to the anchor desk, a reference to the flowers and yellow ribbons that well-wishers had left near her mother's home, and she said, "It is good to be home," in a way that made every person watching understand that home, for her, is not what it used to be and may never be again. She stepped away from the anchor desk mid-show at one point, unexpectedly, sending viewers into immediate concern before she returned. She fought back tears in front of colleagues and cameras and a national audience that had, over 2.5 months, become personally invested in her grief. In an interview with her friend and former co-host Hoda Kotb, Savannah said something that the internet has not stopped quoting since. She said it was too much to bear to think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me. She looked into the camera and said, "I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry." And then she said, with a quietness that landed harder than any dramatic declaration could have, "We still don't know. Honestly, we don't know anything." The public heard that and recognized it as the specific devastation of loving someone who is gone and not knowing if gone means gone forever. And they poured into comment sections and said so. Hundreds of thousands of people who have never met Savannah Guthrie telling her, through screens she will never see, that they are sorry, that they are watching, that they have not looked away. That is what confirmed grief looks like in public. Loud, relentless, reaching. And then there is the silence. Annie Guthrie, Nancy's oldest daughter, Savannah's sister, has maintained a near total public silence since the early days of the investigation. She appeared in the family's first joint video statement. She has been present at family appearances. And beyond that, almost nothing. No individual interviews. No personal public appeals in her own voice about her own mother. No social media presence speaking to this in any sustained individual way. People notice silence. Especially in cases like this. Especially when the person who is silent is the eldest child of the missing woman, the one who, in the architecture of most families, would be expected to be fighting loudest. Here is where it must be said with absolute clarity, silence is not guilt. It is not evidence of anything. People respond to grief and legal counsel and media pressure in profoundly different ways. Some people go quiet because they are shattered beyond the capacity for public performance. Some go quiet because lawyers advise it. Some go quiet because a media environment that has already proven its willingness to turn on them makes public speech feel unsafe. There are entirely innocent explanations for Annie's silence. The law enforcement record says she is a victim in this case, not a suspect, and that record stands. What is also true is that the public does not experience her silence as neutral. It experiences it as a void. And into voids, human minds pour everything they cannot reconcile. The comment sections beneath every article about this case return, again and again, to the same observation, that two sisters are responding to the same loss in ways that feel, to the people watching, profoundly different from each other. That observation is not an accusation. It is the documented reality of how this case is being experienced by the public. And it is a reality that will not be resolved by anything other than the truth, whatever that truth ultimately turns out to be. The DNA evidence in this case is the element that most clearly illustrates the gap between what the public wants and what forensic science can actually deliver on a timeline that feels humane. Blood confirmed to be Nancy's was found at the scene. That confirmation came through DNA testing. Documented, official, real. DNA from at least one other individual was also recovered from the property. The Pima County Sheriff confirmed publicly that the mixed DNA profile is complex, potentially involving 3 or more contributors, and that untangling the strands is a process that requires time and precision that cannot be artificially accelerated without compromising the integrity of the result. A private Florida lab has been working on the evidence since early in the investigation. That lab shared the sample with the FBI. The FBI is now conducting advanced analysis using newer technology. Other labs around the country are reportedly involved. Sheriff Nanos said publicly that it could take 6 more months to isolate what investigators need. He said as many as 5 other labs are working various aspects of the Guthrie case. 24 investigators, FBI and Pima County combined, are still actively working this case. It has not gone cold. It has not been deprioritized. The machinery of federal investigation is moving, methodically and without the urgency that public attention demands, toward a result that the science requires time to produce. The public understands this intellectually, and cannot accept it emotionally. Because the intellectual understanding of DNA complexity and the emotional reality of an 84-year-old woman with a heart condition who has been missing for 75 days exist in 2 completely separate parts of a person's brain. And the emotional part does not wait for the intellectual part to finish explaining why patience is necessary. It simply feels the weight of each passing day as its own indictment of time. Genetic genealogy, the investigative technique that uses DNA to build family trees and identify individuals through their relatives, has cracked cases that sat cold for decades. It is real, it is powerful, and it has a documented record of producing results where conventional DNA analysis could not. The public knows this. They have read about the Golden State Killer. They have followed the cases where a sample that sat in an evidence locker for 30 years led investigators to a doorstep through the patient mapping of a family tree. They are applying that knowledge to this case and asking, if it worked then, why is it not working faster now? The answer is that it is working. It simply does not announce itself until it is done. And the silence of ongoing forensic analysis is indistinguishable from the outside from the silence of no progress at all. That is the cruelest part of following a case in real time, being unable to see the difference between a machine that is running and a machine that has stopped. Several other details in this case have embedded themselves in the public consciousness in the way that only the most unresolved things do, not because they provide answers, but because they deepen questions that were already impossible to sit with comfortably. People who have followed every development in this case know what 70 miles means. They know what a border means for an investigation. They know that the jurisdictional complexity of an international missing persons case is real and documented and genuinely complicating. They also know that a note claiming a location and a subsequent investigation confirming no evidence of that location are 2 entirely different things, and that neither of them tells you what actually happened. Then came the note that shifted everything. An unverified communication arrived claiming that Nancy had gone to be with God. Former FBI supervisory special agents appearing on television called it the work of opportunists. People who insert themselves into high-profile cases with false information for attention or financial motivation. That assessment is credible. It is also, to the people who have spent 2 months hoping, completely devastating to encounter regardless of its authenticity. The Guthrie siblings released a statement saying they wanted to celebrate their mother's beautiful and courageous life, but could not do so until she was brought to her final place of rest. The internet read that sentence and went very quiet. Because that sentence sounds like a family that has begun to grieve a death while still demanding the dignity of a body to bury. It sounds like people who have received information, official or unofficial, confirmed or suspected, that has shifted their language from rescue to something heavier. It sounds like the specific, exhausted grief of people who are no longer fully expecting their mother to walk back through a door. Whether that reading is accurate is not something anyone outside that family can confirm. But the reading is real. And the public sitting with it, unable to resolve it, is real. And the weight of that unresolved grief, distributed across millions of strangers who never met Nancy Guthrie but who have been watching for her for 75 days, is one of the most genuinely human things this case has produced. There is a reward. $1 million, offered by the Guthrie family. $100,000, offered separately by the FBI. Both active. Neither claimed. There is a tip line. 1-800-CALL-FBI. Thousands of calls received. None, as of this recording, producing a named suspect or an arrest. There is a surveillance image, a masked figure, armed, backpack on, tampering with a camera, that has been shared millions of times across every platform and recognized by no one publicly enough to bring law enforcement to a door. There is a Bitcoin wallet that received one confirmed transaction and has otherwise sat empty through every deadline and every appeal and every public plea from a family that said on camera that they would pay. There is a DNA profile being worked on by multiple labs simultaneously, complex enough that the sheriff of Pima County told a neighborhood watch group it could take 6 more months to untangle, and that was weeks ago. And there is a pacemaker. Silent since 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. Carrying in whatever data it recorded before it went dark, whatever it witnessed in the hours between a garage door closing and a device going out of range. That is 75 days. That is the full confirmed, documented, official record of where this case stands. And here is what 75 days looks like from the outside, from the perspective of the millions of ordinary people who have been following this case since the morning Savannah Guthrie stepped away from the Today Show and the world understood that something had happened to her mother. It looks like people who cannot explain why they care this much, only that they do. It looks like comment sections that run to thousands of entries at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. It looks like strangers leaving yellow flowers outside a house in Tucson that belongs to a woman they have never met. It looks like nurses and cardiologists and security professionals and former law enforcement officers showing up in Reddit threads to share what they know about pacemakers and blockchain forensics and the movement patterns of experienced versus inexperienced criminals. It looks like a collective refusal to move on. Not because the public is certain of anything. Not because anyone outside of law enforcement has access to the full picture. But because Nancy Guthrie was a woman of routine and principle and community who went inside her house one January evening and did not come out. And the people watching that story have decided, without coordination or organization or any single authority telling them to, that she will not be forgotten while she is still missing. She was someone's mother. She was someone's grandmother. She lived in the same community for 50 years and raised 3 children there and attended virtual church on Sunday mornings and found comfort in the predictability of ordinary days. She had a heart that needed help to keep its rhythm. And that heart, at 2:28 in the morning, went beyond the reach of the technology that was supposed to keep watch over it. She deserves the noise that the public is making on her behalf. She deserves the questions that refuse to stay quiet. She deserves the yellow flowers and the reward money and the tip lines and the FBI analysts working her DNA profile at 5 labs simultaneously. She deserves, most of all, an answer. This case is not over. The investigation is active. The science is moving. The FBI has not closed a file, issued a final statement, or indicated anything other than that the work continues. What is also true is that 75 days is a long time. Long enough for the initial shock to have faded from the headlines and the algorithm to have pushed the next tragedy into view for people who were not paying close attention. Long enough for the casual follower to have moved on. But not long enough for the people who have been watching from the beginning. Not long enough for the true crime communities that have been mapping every development. Not long enough for the strangers who read about a pacemaker going silent at 2:28 in the morning and have not fully slept since. Those people are still here. Still watching. Still asking. And the single most important thing anyone watching this video can do is not theorize, not speculate, not add another voice to the noise of unanswered questions, but contact the FBI directly if they have information. Real information. Anything. A vehicle they saw in that neighborhood. A conversation they overheard. A detail that felt insignificant at the time but has been sitting uncomfortably in the back of their mind for 2.5 months. The tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The family's reward is $1 million. The FBI's reward is $100,000. The case is open. The investigators are working. And every credible piece of information that reaches the right people matters more right now than any amount of public discussion about what might have happened. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The questions are still unanswered. And the pacemaker that went silent at 2:28 in the morning is still the most important piece of this story, not because of what it has told us, but because of what it might still tell the people with the authority and the technology to ask it the right questions. The truth is in there somewhere. And it is patient in a way that the people looking for Nancy Guthrie cannot afford to be. Do not look away.
could come forward, someone who may have been involved in the kidnapping could come forward and give the information without getting criminally in trouble.
For weeks, every conversation about Nancy Guthrie before. He is not guessing. He is not throwing out possibilities. He is pointing. That shift matters more than it might seem at first. When a reporter of his experience stops searching and starts pointing, it means something has changed in what it.
They won't be remembered in the moment. Right now, we're talking about them, but 2, 3 years from now, we'll be talking about how Savannah handled this with grace and dignity and where her life is then. So I know it does sound flippant. I know it sounds like the obvious, but try and do it yourself. If somebody comes at you at Twitter, try not responding. It's a real skill, and I think it's a skill that Savannah has mastered.
Family plan. Those two words land differently depending on how you hear them. Maybe you think about a phone plan. Maybe you think about something innocent. But in the context of this case, in the way do not point towards something random, they point towards something thought out. The location that has come into focus is not a random patch of desert. It is not somewhere chosen by accident or stumbled upon in a panic. What in listen harder? What location? Why is it connected to this case? And what does family have to do with any of it? Those are the questions this case is now built around. And the answers, when they start to come together, to know. A place connected to access points that are not visible to most people driving by. A place that, when you look at it on a map alongside everything else we know, does not feel like a coincidence, that were tracked in the hours after Nancy disappeared, in the way certain roads were used and others were avoided. The fact that someone moving through that area in the middle of the night would have had to know which turns to make and which cameras to stay away from. That is not the behavior of someone acting without a plan. That is not someone driving around in the dark hoping to find somewhere to go. That is someone who